Hi, my name is David Phelps, and I want to thank you for joining us again today. Today we're going to talk about the power of prayer. And rather than teaching, I'm going to start off introducing this subject with a testimony. It's a story that I heard a few years back, and it's not my personal story, but then this time isn't spent about me personally. It's about my father, and the story does honor him. And so I think it's very appropriate to share with you today. There was a missionary way back in the jungles of the Dark Continent, and he was so far back into the jungles that once a month he would have to take a trip for 2 days to get into a city big enough to buy supplies. On his journeys, he found a campsite about halfway there, a place that he could make into a campsite that would provide some shelter, or at least a remote area, to safeguard him from the wild animals. And he would the next day continue into the city, buy his supplies, and return to his village, once again stopping at this campsite, makeshift campsite, and spending the night before returning the following day. As is normal with missionaries, every year or two he would take a furlough and come back to the U.S. and travel around and visit some of his sponsoring churches and share his testimonies and his success reports, and also receive some funding to continue to support his journeys there. On one particular furlough, he was sharing this story that I'm going to share with you. And on this particular evening, he was in a church in the Midwest, and he was telling a story of how on one occasion he made his ordinary trip into the city to buy supplies, and he stopped in the evening for rest before continuing the next day as the sun came up. And in the nighttime, suddenly he was surrounded by a band of another kind of animals, wild men, and they were a band of thieves who had come fully intending to murder him and to rob him, because they knew he was carrying money for supplies. They had been watching him month after month come into the city and return from the city, and they knew that he returned with supplies and he had to have funds to purchase those supplies. So they had calculated that they'll follow him home one evening and see where he's going, and they had uncovered his campsite. They knew what his strategies and his customary plans were, and so when they knew it was time for him to come to the city, they laid in wait until the night fell and the darkness would hide them, and they came in for the attack. Suddenly he was awakened, not by them pressing against him, but by wild screams of these men as they began to run in fear, horrified, screaming in terror, and he went back to sleep. And he arose the next morning and continued into the city. And as he was buying his supplies, he recognized a man from the night before. And he stopped him and asked him what they were doing at his campsite. And the man told him honestly, "We came to murder you and to rob you." And the missionary asked him, "Well, why did you run away so terrified? What in the world alarmed you? What did I do to frighten you?" And the man looked at him and said, "It wasn't you. It was all those huge soldiers that were surrounding you. There were 11 huge soldiers, and they had swords of flame, and they began to move toward us. And when they came toward us, we were scared out of our minds, and we began to run and holler and scream and in sheer terror, and we ran all the way back to the city. And as he's sharing that story in the church, suddenly a distinguished looking gentleman got up and approached him and said, "Sir, do you mind if I ask what date that was?" And he said, "Certainly, I can tell you exactly what date that was." And he told him. And the man pulled out his calendar and said, "You know, on that same day, a group of men was meeting here at this church, and we were praying. And suddenly, a fierceness rose up within our spirits, and we began to do, it was almost like a battle cry. And we began to pray in the Spirit because we didn't know how we should pray, but we knew that we felt an intense passion and we needed to pray now. We prayed for some time until we sensed that whatever we were fighting for was won, and the assignment was accomplished. And we now understand exactly what we were fighting for. For you said there was 11 huge warriors running off that band of thieves, right? And the missionary said, "That's exactly right." And he turned to the congregation and he said, "Would all the men who was at that prayer meeting on such and such a day stand?" And it probably won't even astonish you that there were 11 men standing. And for each of the prayer warriors who had assembled that day at the prayer meeting, being obedient to the Spirit of God, loving when they were called on to love, and fighting when they were called on to fight, they were the reason, the resource that God used to station those 11 warring angels around the camp of this man of God for his safety and protection. And he remained on the battlefield. He remained on the mission field. He continued to do work and to serve these village people with more renewed interest and passion and dedication and loyalty unto God. And he continued to do his assignment because these 11 men in the Midwest had done their assignment, and they had obeyed God when he called upon them to pray. My friend, there may be times in your lives when you are called upon to pray. And maybe like these men in the Midwest, you don't even know what you're praying for. You may never know what you're praying for. Fortunately, they came to know and they came to understand, and they had, as it were, an epiphany that God is in control and God arranges events in the lives of man. And this missionary came to the realization that he has support and he has help. And I'm not talking about dollar support only. I'm talking about the power of prayer. Praying for people when you don't have an answer to their problems and they don't have an answer to their problems. God has an answer to their problems. But God is looking for some man, some woman of God who will stand in the gap and pray and intercede. And when they know how to pray in their mother language, they can pray in their mother language. And when they don't know how to pray in their mother language, they can yet faithfully and effectively pray in the Spirit and call upon the name of Jesus, and he will answer their prayers, and he will supply their needs, and he will send those prayers to the targeted person that they were praying for. Let me encourage you to be faithful to God and to be faithful to one another. Pray for them. And if you don't know who to pray for, let me remind you, my name is David Phelps, and I would always welcome your prayer. You have people who are praying for you, and you have people in your lives who are in need of and desirous of your prayer. And maybe you can do something for them, and maybe there's nothing that you can do for them, but God can meet their needs. He can give them exactly what they need, exactly when they need it. He is our mainstay. He is our help in the time of need. He's just looking for a faithful vessel. Will you be faithful to Him? Will you pray for one another? And when you don't know how to pray, pray in the Spirit. Shake heaven and terrify hell with your prayers. If you've enjoyed this, pass it along to some of your friends. Subscribe to our channel. We're going to be talking about more stories of effective prayer and more strategies of effective prayer as time goes along. Some of them will be testimonies like this one was, and some of them will be teachings, because that's necessary for the body of Christ too. We sure love you. We appreciate you tuning in today, and hope you'll come back tomorrow or next week again. God bless you.